Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about the concept of building immunity, how your body is able to develop immunity to particular pathogens, um, both after you've been exposed, to protect you in the future, and also we'll talk about the concept of immunisation to help develop immunity before we are exposed. So let's go through the overview first. So we're going to start by thinking about the specific response that our body has to particular pathogens, ways that it's able to target its approach to specific things that might attack you. The concept of adaptive immunity, so that we visited in the last video, thinking about how your body is able to essentially develop a memory. So we'll talk about the memory cells that are also responsible for that, and then the concept of immunisation, how we can develop against future exposure. So let's start by thinking about the specific response that we have. So we're revisiting this fellow over here. You didn't see this image before, but this is a macrophage. Okay, we met the concept of the macrophage in an earlier video. If you need to refresh your memory, go and check that one out, where we talk about the body's defenses. But so the macrophage, remember that the word means big eater. So its job is for specific disposal of pathogens. So the macrophage comes along if we have particular samples of the virus, they get swallowed up by the cell, certain structures inside called lysosomes are responsible for cutting and breaking it down, and then the waste material is ejected for disposal. So this is targeted to particular viruses. There are certain signals or kind of cells that are responsible for tagging these things for removal, so that these macrophages know exactly which ones to be able to remove as efficiently and quickly as possible. So the idea is that it's very specific. It's only looking for particular things, particular pathogens. It's very effective. It means that it's able to remove those pathogens very quickly and simply, and it's also very targeted. So it's not a big kind of wide-scale approach like inflammation or like a fever may be, where it's kind of your body's all over alarm, and it also allows protection against future exposure. So your body needs to have ways to specifically respond to certain pathogens quickly and efficiently and lethally to the bacteria at least, or the pathogen. So now we're going to think a little bit about the concept of adaptive immunity. So how your body is able to develop and to adapt to a situation, develop the immunity that allows you to be protected for the future. So the first thing that happens is that your body needs to be exposed to the pathogen. It needs to identify the enemy. So once the enemy is there and can be easily identified, that then specific white blood cells are developed that can respond and take out that particular pathogen. Certain memory cells remain behind, or some cells that are developed at the same time which remain behind in your body for the rest of your life, or a very long time at least. And we've also formed antibodies, which are kind of the chemicals that help with the tagging of these pathogens for removal. So they're kind of like the markers or the signs that get attached to the pathogen, which then allows them to be disposed of. So we talked about, in a previous video, we talked about this idea of adaptive immunity being both either natural or artificially acquired. So natural, developing throughout your life, either as a fetus inside your mother or by previous exposure. And artificial is where we as human beings have identified that we want to be immune to certain diseases, and we might passively transfer the antibodies which help to get that process going, or we might actually actively expose the person to any active form of the pathogen by the process of immunisation. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So now let's think about, just quickly go over this process of how these cells kind of develop. So we have what's called a B cell, which is what identifies the certain triggers or the certain kind of markers on the outside of the bacteria which develop the process of making antibodies. So it identifies that these are the enemy, it gets activated, and then what it does is then it divides into a plasma cell and a memory cell. The plasma cell can begin the destruction, the memory cell is responsible for remaining behind afterwards. The plasma cell tags the bacteria with these antibodies, the kind of the markers that allow it to be then destroyed. And then these eater cells, which are the macrophages we were talking about before, then attack the ones with antibodies, eat, swallow, destroy, and then spit out the remains. Okay, the memory cell is designed to remain behind in the blood, if that same bacterium is encountered in the future with the same antigen, that the memory cell knows what to look for and then triggers the production of these antibodies very, very quickly, so that the next time around that the exposure is much gentler and much more, so that you may not even really know that you're very sick, because it actually protects you very quickly. So the memory cells are kind of the key here that allow your body to be protected in the future. So you can get lifelong protection, or perhaps for a very long period of time, based on how long those memory cells are around for. But so then, so we can see that this adaptive immunity, the presence of these memory cells, is something that we really want, that allows us to be protected in the future after we've been exposed in the past. But the problem is there are lots of infections, lots of pathogens we might get exposed to, which will kill us the first time we get them. So the concept of immunity afterwards is moot, because we won't be around to benefit from it. So what we could recognize is that developing this immunity a different way that allowed us to remain healthy was really a beneficial thing. And so we can see this man here, his name was Edward Jenner. He discovered in the late 1700s that people who had been infected with a disease called cowpox, which was fairly non-lethal. So if they had been exposed to cowpox in the past, that then they were protected against infection from the much more deadly smallpox, which was a menace right up until the 1970s, when it was finally eradicated. And so he reasoned that there was something in their exposure to the cowpox, the less deadly version, that gave them that protection. And so then he actually was deliberately exposing, or that tested by actually exposing people to the less deadly version of cowpox. They'd get a little bit sick, they'd recover in a few days, and then that allowed them then to be protected against smallpox for the rest of their life. And so that was the concept of vaccination, or what we call as immunisation, the development of immunity. And so the key thing here is that it involves the exposure to the inactive form of the pathogen. You are not being infected with the live virus or the live bacterium that can make you very sick. You are being injected with, or exposed to, an inactive, inert, unable to hurt you version of that pathogen. The idea being that presence alone is able to trigger your body's immune response. It's able to form those memory cells. It can recognize those antigens, that you recognize the markers on the outside of the bacterium or the pathogen that trigger this process. The memory cells are produced so that then if you're exposed to the real version in the future, that you've got all the same protection mechanisms in place. So as I mentioned before, it's highly useful for lethal diseases, or ones that have a really a high mortality rate, so, things where there is a high proportion that high risk of death, even if it's not 100%. That this way, then we can help to minimize the risk of exposure to otherwise really nasty or crippling diseases. And sometimes it's even diseases that are not lethal, but the impact on quality of life is huge, or very significant, like things like measles. Or diseases that are really contagious. So if we can actually reduce the levels of people in the community who have these diseases, then we can stop them spreading to people who otherwise might be killed by them if they don't have enough of an immune system. So not everybody is able to be immunized. If you have what's called a compromised immune system, they're the sort of people that are protected by everybody else being immunized in this way. Because in them, that their immune system is not able to develop the same memory cells, the same protection mechanisms, so they can't really get the benefit from it. But if everybody else is immunized, then there's no one around them that is able to pass on that infection, and they are relatively protected. We call that concept herd immunity. That this idea that the whole herd, or the group of us as a whole population, is able to be protected because our chance of catching that disease from someone is very, very low. And so that means that helps to protect everybody. All right, well, that concludes this video. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.